Yeah, I don't know. This is, anecdotal evidence, although I've heard common themes periodically in different entrepreneurial groups that I'm a part of. But more recently, to your point, I've had actual conversations with people and individuals that I would consider, very high achievers, very goal oriented, really wanting to push the boundaries of what they're able to do, whether that's in their own personal life or in their business life. And it made me think about patterns that we develop as high performing individuals or very driven individuals, in that we get so laser focused on what we need to do, where we need to go, and what goals we need to accomplish, that we just head down and go, not realizing that some of our relationships maybe are not given as much time and attention. And then there's this wake up period that comes when people think, wait a minute, where did all my deep connections go? And then there's almost a shift back towards putting intentional time into those personal relationships that really motivate you, fulfill you, and bring you happiness. And I think it's a really great topic to share because we talk a lot about setting goals, essential actions, and, having that holistic perspective on your life, as you go and move towards your goals. But we don't spend a lot of time talking about what happens when you stop investing in relationships that are meaningful to you.
Just that makes sense. I want to get a little bit more focused though, so just kind of a follow up there because I think it's really important because the word relationships is so broad for a lot of people, and
Yeah.
I'll my 2 cents on this as well. So just the conversations that you had, I think it's really important to understand what those people are referring to in terms of relationships. Is that an expansion of their own network? Is it family and close friends because they're trying to do life with somebody? Are they entering a relationship because they want to grow their business and then realize everybody in their circle is only about business and not about the personal stuff? So it really does kind of matter. So can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
I think it's all of them. I think how we define relationships and what we define as meaningful relationships is very individualized.
Hmm.
So for me, there is, yes, my personal relationship with my husband that is important. And I need to make sure that I'm intentionally taking time to pour into him for the sake of our marriage. And then there is another side of friendships that I consider meaningful relationships, in that we get it because we're like-minded, we're on a similar journey, we pick each other up, we challenge each other, but we also laugh and can appreciate the journey as we go along. And I'm sure there's people that might say, well, actually the relationships that I want to pour into are strictly business at this point of time. I'm out there intentionally meeting people that are at the next level to me, and I don't necessarily need someone to go play golf with on a Saturday because that is not in the scope of a relationship that I'm looking for. So one, I think it's relationships are very individualized, but I also think that relationships and what you need out of them and who fits into those
Hmm.
changes as you evolve as a person in your development journey, and also just as you age through experiences.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the word experience is really important because I agree. I think it is very individualized. What types of relationships people are looking for, it is very dependent upon what phase or stage of life you're in. If you're starting a business, are you interested in people that have the experience of business ahead of you? Are you just looking for somebody to keep you grounded? It's actually one of the reasons how in habitual growth, the community and category idea came about. So when you're going in and you're setting your essential actions and you have the ability to create categories or assign categories to those essential actions, the community one actually is kind of how this whole thing started, or that piece of the application. Because for me as an individual in my past life, when I was working for somebody else, I was a remote worker. So I would have to work from home. I am married, have kids. I'm not going to the bars. I'm not going out to meet people. And and my wife kept saying, go out, go have fun, get out of the house. And I'm like, I really actually don't have anybody to go out with, right? We had just moved
Mhm.
states, and all my old friends had either moved away or they had families of their own. And so it was just a different phase of life. And so I had to be extremely purposeful about how I was going to build my community. And so I would go in and it was months on end. Once a week, I'd probably have an essential action that I would assign the community category to, and then I would have to follow through with that. So that was being intentional with
Mhm.
what I was looking for in terms of relationships, where I was being intentional and looking for those relationships, and then really just the word experience is kind of it. It was just it's kind of like dating, right? And we forget
Yeah.
that sometimes. Like we think about dating as like, hey, this is just going to be our partner for, this period of time or, a lifetime, whatever it is. But the reality is that that's how friendships are too. That's how relationships are. You have to test a bunch of people in business. You have to test a bunch of people in your social network, in your dating life, whatever it is. And so, it takes time to build that community.
Yeah. And there's two things that you talked about that I think are important. And one is the community tab in the Habitual Growth app, because it sounds like you and I actually approach it differently, which is interesting. So I view community in there and I mark things, actions, or goals related to community in terms of my ability to impact and pay it forward.
Mm.
Not so much building necessarily intentional relationships one-on-one or in a small group.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important call out for people is what does community mean to you and how do you want to fill that bucket, because I think it can be utilized in a lot of different
Mhm.
ways.
Yeah.
um, the other part, and it's just a suggestion, I've had a couple people that I've checked in with that are actively working to do this and build relationships. And they literally put on their essential actions list every single day, reach out to one person.
Mm.
Because even when it comes to relationships, it's that small daily action that really builds over time. You can't expect people to come to you. You can't expect people to jump on board if you haven't reached out to them for months and months and months and say, hey, let's go do this big thing. It really does start with small actions compounding over time, building into more solid relationships.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. And I think that this is the perfect example of how this works for every category, but then again, how individuals, users, or personalities have to define their own path, right? There's never going to be one thing, one category that works for everybody in the same capacity. I started one of using community as an intentional way to reach out to other people to build my own social network. That's now kind of aligned with how I use it in terms of what you just said. Basically, I will do things for a business that impact the greater community. This as
Yeah.
an example of us speaking and creating this content that we can put out there in the world builds a social community. It builds an habitual growth community that we can create value with. Andy Frisella talks about it in a slightly different way when, he talks about after he got stabbed in the face and he was going around and he met that woman in the grocery store and he had forced himself every single day to speak to three different people, three random strangers, and he wouldn't leave the grocery store until he went. That's a different level of community. And so it really is highly dependent upon the user, what they're looking for. And the point isn't like everybody has to build a community or define the word in the same way. It just is, how are you going to apply that if you are
Yeah.
using the word community in some way? And then how are you putting intentional action behind it and then holding yourself accountable through that essential action?
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. And I think for the purposes of this conversation, there's a lot of nuts and bolts behind it, but the overarching theme is you may find yourself in points along your journey where you feel disconnected. And that's not necessarily something that you're, no pun intended, alone in. Um,
Yeah.
but, but recognizing that other people have had that similar experience,
Mhm.
and it comes just from you learning how to fill all of those holistic buckets, and also recognizing that not every bucket can be filled to the same capacity at all times.
Yeah.
And so you will have ebbs and flows of where you put your time and what you need. And that's totally okay.
It's totally okay, and it's just that's how life works.
Yep.
You don't have the time and energy to do all the things that you want to do, and if you are a productive and motivated individual, what will end up happening if it doesn't happen in this capacity now, you will just find ways to always improve. We're talking about community, so let's continue on this thread, but it does apply to every category and almost every aspect of people's lives. But it's just, where are the areas where you can improve? I gave you the example of how I had to actually build my social network for a while. Well, then I started, I got involved in some entrepreneurship groups, and I really started to connect with some of those individuals, and I created this friend group. But then, I looked over to the right, and Bree and I didn't necessarily have a very solid religious or church community. And that was something that's really important to us. And so then it became, all right, well, how do we get off the bench, stop observing, and get in here and, create that church community? So it started with volunteering. It started with us starting a small group at our house, and every 2 weeks we host, I think it's 4 to 5 different couples that come over, and we just build community. And that's more based on life journeys, not necessarily business. And so, as you continue to just go down the path of life, all these decisions, they compound, but it really just helps you be aware and identify where you want to improve. And then that improvement will obviously be a base layer at some point, and you're going to improve upon that. It's just going to be like, how are you continuously progressing? How are you putting one foot in front of the other that really gets you to that destination that you're trying to get to?
Yeah, agreed. So outside of maybe reaching out via text or phone to somebody, to start to build more intentionality into creating, fostering, growing relationships, do you have any other suggestions for people that might not really know where to start?
I think a lot of it is just putting yourself out there. One of the things that I guess that I wasn't always great at is taking that first step, right? I always just assumed like, hey, I'm this awesome person, everybody's gonna love me, right? Which is never the case for anybody. And
Speak
and
for your
yeah, people don't know you, they don't know your personality, and so
yeah.
nobody ever wants to take that first step. So simply just creating the interaction is one thing. And then, what I've also really learned is I feel like the bar is just low for a lot of people. And that's not really said in a negative way, but it's more in the sense of like being proactive, doing the outreach, extending yourself because you are confident in the person that you actually are means a lot. It says something about you that you're creating that initial action. And then on the follow-up side of that, it's, hey, I really enjoyed our conversation. I'm here to support you. If you need anything, always think of me as a friend and an ally. It doesn't always have to be this robust, hey, now it's going to blossom and take up all my time because it's this amazing relationship. That's never how it goes.
Yeah, I think there's that too. And then I think maybe one other thing, there's a tendency to not want to take the first step or to initiate any interaction because we feel like it has to go perfectly. And I would say it rarely goes perfectly. I mean,
Yeah.
when you really authentically put yourself out there, I mean, you don't know what you're going to get on the other side from that person. And so the best thing that you can do is walk in with positive intent and look for ways to foster commonalities.
Yeah.
But the interaction doesn't have to be perfect right off the gate. And you'll have to practice over and over and do it over and over to get to a point where it's less uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I've said this before, but one of the things that always stuck out to me, I can't remember who said it, but it was a CEO of an important company, and basically he said, "Listen, like I'm here to create value for the community, and if it takes me less than 5 minutes to do something, I will always say yes." And I think that's just an important lesson because one, we conflate the amount of effort and time it takes to
Yeah.
build relationships, number one. Then number two, we have this, oh my gosh, down the line, like I don't know what I'm going to do with this person or what commonalities there are. And the reality is like if it takes you 5 minutes to pick up the phone and talk to somebody that's reached out to you, almost everybody has the ability to do that. There are very few exceptions, or when you get to a certain level, you really need to restrict your time or your presence for certain reasons. So I get that. But most people, number one, aren't there, and number two, will never get to that point. And so if community is really important to you, you should always be looking for those opportunities because you never know where it's going to lead. One person can lead to another person, which can lead to another person, which can drastically change your life. And so why not say no to that, especially if somebody has come to you and they're reaching out, right? You can simply open, and I do this a lot of the times to people that reach out to me or people that I reach. I did this yesterday actually to a potential business partner. I said, listen, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm not expecting anything out of this conversation. I want you to know there's no agenda. This is me. This is my brand. These are our products. I want you to be familiar with me. Let me tell you a little bit about me, but more importantly, I want to learn about you because if we like each other, there's something down the line, I can circle back in a month and we can pick the conversation back up. And that just alleviates a lot of, I think, the nervousness, the contention, the why am I on the phone talking to this person? I don't know how they
Yeah.
fit in. And I think just getting in front and framing the conversation in that way sometimes can really help people feel more comfortable about just having a general connective conversation.
Yeah. And I think you said an important thing, which is I'm not expecting anything from you
Yeah.
because there is, especially in the business world, people assume if you're being reached out to or you're reaching out to someone, that it's for a reason you want something from them and getting over that hump and saying, hey, this is just a good intent, like reach out. How are you?
Yeah.
That goes a long way.
Yeah. And I do that all the time. Something Ed Milet used to say in probably like a year ago, that you could tell this was on his agenda, but it was, I create this short little, hey, you crossed my mind. I'm thinking of you.
Oh, yeah,
I do that all the time. It
yeah,
takes 10 seconds, literally. And I did it 4 times today already, where somebody just crosses my mind. I like the person. I'm gonna reach out. Hey, you were just on my mind. You all good? Like, can I do anything for you? Most people don't respond. Most people, are like, no, I'm good. Like, thanks for thinking of me. So it's a really
yeah,
easy interaction, number one, but it keeps you top of mind. It keeps your community strong, and it keeps me always looking out for opportunities to think about other people. And I think that is extremely understated in these conversations as well, is
yeah.
how do you look outside of self? How do you be aware of what other people are doing and how you can insert yourself into their community in a way to create value, not in a way to take, but in a way to create value and support them because that's where those long-lasting relationships start.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, awesome. This was great conversation today. I hopefully people got a few tidbits out of our
Absolutely.
conversations and take some intentional action to build some relationships.
All right, let's go. Talk to you later.